Thanks, Nataraj, and thanks, Bittu, for responding to our invitation and joining us again. It's great to see you again. We had a very good discussion, uh, both the recorded one and of course we had a fairly long session afterwards with just me and Bittu talking about different things. It was just wonderful to know, and I learned so much just by having a talk and discussing different things with Bittu. So I won't spend time in introducing people who want to know Bittu. So you can just Google it. You will know more about him than what I can talk about. But I've been following him with my love for the forest and the tiger and what Bittu has done over the years in Project Tiger and Sanctuary Nature Foundation. It's been a wonderful journey, and he spoke a bit about it in that video. And students who haven't seen that video, I will really encourage you to go and listen to what he said, and not only him, all the other videos that we put up on the India Impact website, as well as on the Quantum Advisors website. Uh, so Bittu, you told me that you would like to speak to students, and here you are, right? So we've got you back. Some students have logged in, but this is a recorded session, and many
Yeah.
more students. So there are 35 teams as of now, from global business schools who have registered for the competition. They still have another 5 odd days to register themselves, and come in April, they will start presenting their business case studies. So just as we gave that perspective of India, right? So we did an interview with you. We spoke to Aarti Khosla on climate change. We spoke to Jyoti Pandey on air pollution. She's written a very nice book on breathing in India is injurious to your health. We
Yeah.
spoke to Mirai Chatterjee on the social
Yeah.
aspects of climate change, women workforce, informal
Mm.
employment. And we spoke to Tushar Shah on water. So we're going to go back to all of them and get them to speak to students. So basically what we want from you today is as the students start preparing their business case studies and their ideas, if you could highlight three important things that they should consider, both from a India climate change perspective and also from a business perspective. When you talk about your tri-junction of biodiversity, ecology, and economics. So if you can highlight three of the major issues that you think that the students who are participating in this competition to think about India, both from a ecology, climate perspective, as well as from a business. So over to you, Bittu.
So essentially, as the old song goes, let's start at the very beginning.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, what we have to accept and imbibe first is a touch of humility and an acceptance that everything that Homo sapiens does, it emerges from the biosphere, and therefore the biosphere is the foundation upon which all else is built, including the economy. When we talk to young people, and we talk to quite a large number of young people in India, we start off with a simple premise, and what we say is that the economy is a wholly owned subsidiary of the environment.
Yeah.
Now, that can be taken in several different ways, but one very clear acceptance, young people, and I would say prime ministers and presidents have to accept that if we don't adapt, whether you're a corporation, whether you're an individual, whether you're an organization or an NGO, if you don't adapt to changing circumstances, then you are destined to irrelevance, which is probably sometimes worse than being wiped out completely. And in this case right now, what is happening is that you get guys like me behind me, you see a tiger's eyes and things like this, and people may misunderstand that here's a guy who's just looking to save the tiger. The truth is, I was using the tiger the way somebody might use a film star or a sports person or something like this, because the tiger merely represents all of nature. It's a metaphor. Now, let me put it to you like this, that let's talk first about the economy. There may be arguments here and there, but it's certainly in the range between 20 and 30 trillion dollars have been lost in the global economy over the last 10 months, 12 months. Now, why was that lost? It was lost because there were people who continued what I would call the out of date economists, were of the opinion that we can buy our way out of this. We can throw money at the problem and we'll solve it. It won't be solved. So that's where the humility comes in, where it's possible for one human being to dominate another human being and say, I'm tougher than you in the ring, I'm tougher than you in the stock market, I'm tougher than you in the market. Nobody is tougher than the biosphere. And when we fiddle with the biosphere, we're actually tampering. The analogy, the most commonly used analogy is tampering with the engine of a plane while you're in mid-flight saying, I've got the best engineers in the world with me. I wouldn't still fiddle with it, you know. That that simple line that says, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, you know. And at this moment, the biosphere, it wasn't broke. We've broken it. And we've dug ourselves a hole, and in trying to get ourselves out of the hole, we're using spades and digging the bottom of the hole. What sense does that make? So, first, the humility, second, the acceptance, and third, the innate belief from one's marrow that the biosphere is one of the few inventions by this thing we call nature that allowed you to have your cake and eat it too, you know. It's self-repairing. I would tell young students first that please do not allow my generation to turn you into catatonic human beings who are faced with immense problems and you feel completely inadequate and you cannot solve it on your own. Each one of us is causing the problem with our lifestyles, with our misunderstandings, with our silences, perhaps with our active involvement. We're causing the problem individually, and we will solve the problem through individuals. It's not that every single individual has to do this. The credible individuals will take a few steps, shine a few lights, and the rest will follow. The world has always followed those people who have gone where angels fear to tread. And right now, the few angels that are trying to tread in directions that shake the status quo are being singled out. I'm not talking of Trump, you know, I'm talking about every country in the world where you have a firmly entrenched market. The market leader does not want the competition to come in. Forget about, we try harder and things like this. The fact is that the market leader does not want competition. And at the moment, when I say market leaders, I'm talking about political parties, I'm talking about the largest corporations, I'm talking about the people who have learned to profit from our inaction. I won't go into a big, long diatribe about this. I will just say that Darwin said something so simple, paraphrased, that it's not the strongest, it's not the most intelligent, it's the most adaptable that will survive. If I had to go and give a lecture to somebody in the corporate world, and if I had to talk to all the institutions or in Davos or anywhere, I would just tell them this, that it's not the strongest, not the richest, not the most intelligent, it's the most adaptable. So if climate change is asking you to adapt and you refuse, then the biosphere is not going to sit here in judgment. And the biosphere is not going to sit here and do anything other than first give you a warning and then give you consequences. And it is completely democratic. I mean, it could be Arvind Chari that's causing the whole world to collapse, but it'll be Jeff that pays the price, you know. And so, to that extent, as primates, we are essentially bumped up monkeys. As primates, we know how to get together, but somehow or the other, we have separated ourselves from this genetic dependence upon each other. And we believe that we can continue to proceed in a direction which is clearly wrong in terms of climate and believe we can buy our way out. I don't think that'll happen. I will stop here at this point. I don't think I've covered it in a very, ticking the boxes kind of thing, but this is the hard truth. And I would say to the young people that as a person who's been teaching young people for 40 years, I know for a fact that young people don't do what they're told to do. They do what their elders do. So I am so damn sorry we've set a bad example for you, but don't take those bad examples as an excuse to be bad yourself. Learn to respect the biosphere, learn to use the resources, and proceed with confidence, because the biosphere is self-repairing like a cut on your hand. Unlike the Titanic, whose hull was broken and it sank because the hull couldn't fix itself, this one can fix itself. But these are all ICUs. The whole globe now is an ICU. It's an intensive conservation unit. You have to protect the source of all your food, all your energy, all your health, and everything else. And I'll stop at this point, and then let the questions roll. I'll be delighted to speak with the young, or Arvind, any questions that are thrown at me. I don't pretend to be very wise, but if I get a question I can't answer, I celebrate, because then I start researching.
That's a nice way to. Uh, in your discussion, you spoke about certain aspects, right? You talked about the aquifers, for that, for
Yeah.
example. You spoke about how irrigation and dam building. Uh, you want to talk about that? Is that a segue where what students can think in terms of, is there uh, money which can be invested, long term large capital money from large global investors, in things like recharging the aquifers? Is there a way to think about all that?
Yes. In fact, I would put it to you like this, that those corporations, those countries, those financial institutions, those economists that understand a simple economic principle, that if you have an existing asset and you have to invest 10% of its value on making it work, it's better than investing in a completely new asset, particularly if the new asset is not an improved one. So if I have to buy a car, model XYZ, and the carburetor is not working, it makes no sense for me to buy a new car. It's better to fix the carburetor. So with the dams, let's it's a simple, fairly easy thing. Honestly, 12-year-olds understand this. That a dam is as good as its catchment. The catchment is wherever the rain falls, where the land catches it and channels it into a river which is dammed. That's the catchment. Now, if we denude the catchment of its natural vegetation, then with every rain that falls or every glacial melt that comes down a river, along with the water will come silt, which feeds the bottom of the reservoir. And while newspaper headlines say the dam is full, the water is overflowing, what they forget to tell you is the bottom is also rising. So your reservoir capacity is being reduced. And does that have an economic implication? Absolutely, Arvind. It has a hardcore economic implication, because all dams, irrespective of where they're built on the basis of cost benefit ratios. And in India, they say, for instance, that if you got to invest $100 in a dam, then over the life of the dam, it's got to return you at least $150. Now, when you say 1 is to 1.5, you base it on the life of the dam. Now, suppose I anticipate a dam, and there are n number of these that I can point out. In India, between 90 and 97% of all our dams are dying between 50% and 30% before they were supposed to die out. So your entire mathematics has changed financially, because your cost benefit ratio has gone for a 6. If you buy a car that you're supposed to drive for 6 years and it conks out in 2.5 years, you've made a very bad capital investment. But if you take an investment and fix that car and you make it run for not 6 years but 8 years, it makes good sense. Come back to dams. Let's kill two birds or three birds with one stone, to use a wrong metaphor perhaps for the tiger back there. I'd say that if India has 4,000 large dams, look what's happened with the pandemic. We have had more people migrating away from cities in the pandemic than migrated during the partition of India in 1947. Many of those people have come back because all the capital has come into the city centers, and this is where the money is, this is where the employment is. But not all of them. What happens to the people who are back in the village? And the catchment areas are not in the cities. The catchment areas are 100 miles away, 200 miles away, 500 miles away. Those catchment areas desperately need for the water which runs to be made to walk, the water which walks to be made to stay, and the water that stays to be made to sit and be fed into the aquifers. By far, the largest storage known to human beings is subsurface and in the soil. It's not in those beautifully blue lake, reservoirs that we love to think are producing agriculture, they are preventing floods, they are, uh, drought proofing us, and they're producing electricity. It doesn't work. That's a fiction. So I don't want to go on for too long with every question, but I would put it to you like this, that we could put India, let me specifically talk of India, we could put between 20 and 30, 40 million people back to work in the next 3 to 5 years' time to fix the catchments. Fixing the catchments means slowing the water. Slowing the water means merely taking, say, a stream and putting a few rocks down there, but you're talking about, say, 500,000 streams. You're talking about contour trenches. So you just have trenches. So when the silt comes, it falls into the trench. The water gets slowed. Or contour bunds, what they call. That means you make small structures which are just 2, 3 feet high, and you line them along the contours of this, and the water slows and the silt collects behind. And this is manual work. This is not the work for JCBs. This is not the work for heavy machinery. Of course, you need some trucks, you need stuff, but it could put between 20 and 50 million people back to work. And the almost unbelievably magical thing is that it just takes 2 seasons or 2 years or 3 years. Your capex returns are 2 years, 3 years, because the grasses grow. The grasses grow, it stops the silt to an extent. The bushes come back, the rootstock comes back. It's a no-brainer, but it doesn't help the large contractors. These are guys who get $1 billion contract to build a dam. Now that guy is not interested in passing that $1 billion, 90% of it on to some poor guys who are hanging around and who look like they're half starved. They're not, they're very strong. They built all the first 300 dams in India. And I would wager that not just India, but America too, will have to decommission its dams to allow the economy of free-flowing rivers to come back. And I've again gone on a little longer. So please, next question or whatever.
But before we get others to think of their questions and to ask,
Yeah.
can you think of in your interactions with the corporate world also, right? You do work with foundations and you work with corporate foundations. Can you think of 2 or 3 examples, or even one example of a corporate foundation or an investment company like a pension fund, or global pension fund as, or an impact fund, uh, taking up projects and making a big difference? And do you have any examples of that to share?
There are several examples of this, but they are not necessarily examples that are replicable now post-COVID,
Okay.
post-climate crises, because it's so new to the corporates as well that they haven't looked at it. If you take corporate social responsibility, most of their energy has been spent in doing good,
Yeah.
educating a person, making sure, cancer care is taken, and all necessary
Yeah.
things.
Right.
We will have to, I think, invent quick step, quickly, the way that we came up with the vaccine within a period of a year.
Yeah.
We will have to invent a way in which we get corporates to focus on water. How corporates will solve the problem that I'm spending the money, I'm doing all the work, and some poor farmer somewhere is getting the benefit and I'm not getting the benefit. Arvind, I don't have the answer to that.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
have the answer to what can be done, how democratically it can be distributed, and how this can be turned into profit. I can just say this, that with now this PPP business, public-private partnership thing, 95% of those partnerships, I'm quoting 95% as a generalization,
Yeah.
are things that exaggerate the problem. You have a PPP, let's say, for the extraction of lignite or bauxite or iron ore or coal from a forest, which is actually the one that's harvesting the water and feeding the aquifer. And what
Right.
you do is you poison the aquifer, you cause runoff over there, you cause the dam to be silted. It's a private public partnership, but it's not helping. It's like the Colombian drug cartel coming down and saying, I'll help you to start a drug rehabilitation clinic and I'll send El Chapo there, he'll help you. It won't work. It simply won't work. So I'm saying to you right now that if I were any company, let's say I was a company doing white goods, making refrigerators and doing stuff like this, I want people to have a little surplus money Maybe they would want a fan, maybe they would want an air conditioner, maybe they'd want this. I can only do that if they have a surplus. If I am able to, in 3 years or 4 years' time, make a distinct impact on the fact that the meager income that a person has in India, let's say he's earning $500 a month or $1,000 a month, if he's, somewhere middle class,
Yeah.
thereabouts. If he was able to actually spend 20-30% of that, because he did not have to replace his carpet, he did not have to replace his sofa sets, he did not have to, pay 80% of the premium on the car that got washed away because the insurance company has so many clauses, he would spend it on something that made him comfortable. There is not going to be much demand for anything other than necessities. And I believe that the best way for corporates to get together right now is to make sure that the consumer has more money in his pocket. And we have suggested this to the Indian government that with Narega, which
Yeah.
many corporates consider to be a tax, and it's wrongly spent, it's being spent on consumers, whether they are buying farm goods or whether they are buying household goods. GDP
Right.
cannot trickle down, and that cannot be the thing. It has to bubble up. And I think the correct way to do that would be to make the past investments in large dams work. It would also be in making sure that those dams which are absolutely not working, we should decommission them. This takes a huge amount of investment. If you take a thermal plant that has been based on, let's say, coal mining, and it's got open pit mining, and now the pit head to the bottom is 250 meters. Imagine what we could do by channeling water down there, turning the turbines, pumping the water up during the day, perhaps using solar panels even, and then
Right.
releasing the water in the evening when the when the demand is there. We need to be creative. We need to adapt, Arvind. And at this moment in time, I am. I don't want to, you know, tell your students, "Oh my God, the world is coming to an end." All I'll say is that you need to go to the financiers and you need to go to the energy producers and you need to possibly change a few CEOs because they are stuck in yesterday and they don't understand that investing money in stranded assets right at the start of your investment is not going to help the economy. The glaciers are melting. There's no point building dams underneath that based on river flow data which were 11 years old.
Right.
And if we invest it right, already there are large areas. Farming is one. The corporations are coming in over there and saying, grow the same plant all over. Nature's not going to allow us to do that. You can't have wall-to-wall cotton anymore. You're going to have multi-cropping. But that could be a huge investment, bringing
Yeah.
biodiversity back to the 6 inches of soil. According to me, it's been the age of the pesticides and fertilizers. Well, those companies are zombies. They're dead men walking. But when you bring fertility back to the soil, you have actually got, and I think the IT industry per se has a huge role to play in this, huge role to play, and so on and so forth. Sorry, again, too long.
No, no, yeah. Anybody else has a question, please?
Okay, that's one very, very good point you've raised actually. If we want to use our waterways for transport, for moving goods and moving people, and we've got beautiful large rivers where we can do that, you're not going to be able to do that if you've got 11 dams on that, to start with. So when I say free flowing rivers, it really means that those rivers must be able to be navigable. They don't need deep draft ships. But I do believe that it is necessary for us to look at rivers the same way that we look at coasts. India has something called the Coastal Regulation Zone. We have been pushing for the last 10 years that we should be able to use our coasts for, for goods and people to move, more jetties, more facilities. But here is the problem. The problem is that India's got so many ports already, and we have all our rail lines at sea level. We've got all our go downs at sea level. We've got our dry docks now at sea level. And we need to put in huge amounts of money, billions and billions of dollars to raise this infrastructure to a level where even if you have, say, 600 millimeters of rain in a worst case scenario, You're not going to be able to stop that port. The ship will rise and come to wherever it has to come. But how will it get off the ship and go into the goods and go into the hinterland? So we have to look at the investments for rivers, on the free flowing of rivers. We have to look at the investments of along the coastline, the same thing, but we have to look at it with a slightly different filter. You can't look at a climate crisis filter and hope to solve a problem with something that was there when the climate was stable. And I keep referring to climate because, frankly, climate and water are interchangeable issues. I mean, anything, whether you talk of wells or large dams or municipal corporations or the washeries you need for coal or the iron ore, the steel producing, everybody needs that water. And oh boy, we've got a problem that, Houston, we've got to solve it, but we won't solve it by digging a deeper hole. I don't think that the laws which are being passed right now have taken into account a 20-year span as to what would happen, a worst case scenario. All disaster management plans and the climate crisis is a disaster. You must take the worst case scenario. When somebody is coming to do an insurance, um, you know, quoting you a premium, he's going to look at all the risks that you have. And the bottom line is, I saw that Ajit was talking in terms of safety just now, and I'm saying to you, most certainly, the issue of safety is huge. The investments we need to put into that are huge, and I think that's a economic growth industry right now. So far, it's just been, I come to the buffet and I pile everything up into my plate, leaving nothing for anybody else. Today, it's going to be different. The nature of business is going to be different in the next 10 years, 15 years. I'm not sure I answered, Gabriel, exactly what you wanted. I mean, off the top of my head, I'd say energy for sure. Of course, cotton, between the growing of it and the processing of it and the dyeing and everything else, consumes a lot of water. But energy is really it, because between the dams that we use and between the um, cooling towers that we need, the water we need for cooling. I mean, quite honestly, if you were to actually take energy as your choice, you'd be putting your finger on the correct pulse for now, I would say. But that just putting the finger on the pulse won't work unless the medicine is right as well. So you've got to do the right thing after you've got your finger on the pulse. And if you only exaggerate the problem, which is what I see as a distinct possibility, that if I keep working with analogies, Errol, and I'd say that if my liver is shot to hell because I drink too many single malts, I won't solve my liver problem by shifting to rum. I've got to just cut down a little bit and then let the liver regenerate. And that's actually all the planet is asking of us. It's saying we're in the ICU, intensive conservation unit. In the ICU, you're not asked to do 5 push-ups and 10 push-ups. You're asked to rest a little. Let the body repair itself. Like a cut on your hand, it can repair itself. And that goes for energy hardcore. Hardcore. Because we've got 4,000 large dams in India, for instance. I keep talking about India because I know it. But those 4,000 large dams are crying out for the rain when it falls not to go as silt into the reservoir. And we want lean season flows of water to not just turn turbines, but also fill the aquifers, which feed the wells, which produce the food, which keep soil moisture up. And it's sometimes so obvious that one misses it. And such a low amount, such a tiny fragment of investment there, economic investment, such a tiny fragment compared to building 300 new dams with 4,000 small coffer dams and 5,000 kilometers of roads and canals, for which you'll need cement to be dug out of the limestone will come out of the forests which harvest your water. It's like the Keystone Cops, I think sometimes, it's not quite working. I think in financial terms, actually, if you look at solar energy right now, it is outstripping all fossil fuel energy in terms of growth, in terms of employment, in terms of profits, and even to the consumer, the costs are less. So actually, that is one battle that I think environmentalists, etc., should stay out of that. Let the market fix that one. Let the market do one right thing. So
Okay.
I would say to you that yes. Um, it's so far in the past, let's say a decade ago, it was thought that solar was only supposed to be in deserts and places like this and feed into the grid. But if you come down to it, I mean, the sun shines democratically everywhere in India. And if it's democratically distributed, why should it be concentrated and then redistributed? The new technology is coming in right now. Your window panes can generate power. And the same thing with wind. People say, of course, there are problems with storage. It's not as though it's a cakewalk, but these are solvable problems. These are solvable problems. And at night, for instance, now you've got the equivalent of tubes, which may be about 10 meters tall. And irrespective of which way the wind blows, the turbines inside there at least manage to generate enough electricity to pump water up. So in urban India, given the fact that the supply sources, the transmission, there's a logjam there, there's a thrombosis there, and there's also a thrombosis in terms of water supply. It makes patent good sense for large companies to use the rooftops of urban India to generate not just power from solar and wind, but even food. And food, at the end of the day, when you generate it, you're actually saving energy, which is generating energy. Penny saved is a penny earned kind of thing. It's inevitable that people will do that because the supply chains will not be able to. You have to think of a chain, the weakest link being the strength of the chain. And when you
Okay.
have a flood or when you have a disaster, the urban areas will be starved of food and starved of energy. And they have to be much more self-sufficient. That means producing the energy and producing some part of the food, not all the food, within the urban areas, so that you can at least last 15 days, 20 days, 30 days. At the
Mm-hmm.
moment, it wouldn't last 2 days in most
Okay.
places. So I think a lot of investments need to go there, and that's where private capital should go. If they can do it for antenna, for instance, every rooftop has an antenna, 4G, 5G, etc., etc. They've done their negotiations with each building. Now, suppose they were to do the same negotiation and say that, look, we'll set up these, we'll give you your power for your building enough to run your campus, and whatever extra power there is, we'll give you this much, you get the picture. I think that's the future, not just for India, but it's the future for New York as well. Well, there are rules. There's something called FSI, floor space index, that in such and such space you can only use so much built up area because you'll consume so much energy, you'll consume so much water, your sewage lines are limited. But in most urban cities in India, you'll have a very large slum population. When you say slum population, it's not derogatory, it's just a description. These are the informal sector. And the strange thing, Jeff, is that this informal sector, there's a place called Dharavi, right outside Mumbai. Mumbai has over 20 million people. And Dharavi, if you look at their usage of resources, it's 3 to 5 times more effective, energy effective, resource effective, time effective than the rest of us who live in places where we've got, at this moment, I'm speaking to you on a computer and there are two lights in front of me. Those
Yeah.
guys manage. And we're going to come to a situation where if we don't now recognize, if we don't recognize this in urban India, that you've got to be able to be slightly more in stages, in a year, 2 years, 4 years, 5 years, self-sufficient, then the rural hinterland is no longer going to be colonized for much longer by urban India, or for that matter, um, Manila or Paris, or take any city in the world. You will not be able to colonize your rural areas because your
Mm-hmm.
rural areas will themselves be in trouble because we have caused a climate, we've caused climate weirding, you know. I'd put it like this, in truth, they use almost everything. Let's take a tire on a car. If you take a tire on a car, you strip it away, you throw it away, you have no idea you bought a new tire. But where does that tire go? Either it can go onto a landfill, but we've got people over there who'll get their machines out and they'll start cutting the tires down and they make soles for shoes. I mean, it's they do not want to waste. In India, they do not want to waste. The waste in terms of plastic is very high because when you take thin plastic bags, they're good for next to nothing. So you'll find plastic bags all over purely because that can't be turned into cash. But if you take other plastics, you take a bottle. Now this
Mhm.
bottle, I don't use plastic bottle, it's a glass bottle. But what they do is that the plastic bottle is that they fill it, make a hole in their roof, cement that hole down, and make sure that when the light comes in through the roof, this is reflected from so that a dark, small, pokey 8 foot by 8 foot room can be illuminated by four of these bottles just put upside down.
Okay.
Just to give you, I'm only giving you an idea of the ingenuity that necessity produces for them. In our case, we're extremely wasteful. We're not just industries are wasteful, consumers are wasteful. Convenience has become uh, something that people have learned to cash in on. And your generation, Errol, I can promise you, you will not be able to do it. And I'm hoping that you will recognize and stop my generation from doing it too.